Who briefed me on what, Senator?
Who briefed you on the investigation?
On the investigation?
Yes, sir.
The first I heard, to the best of my recollection of the investigation, was Mr. Miller telling me that there was the existing list, and it was something that the Inspector General was going to look into.
Mr. George, did you brief Mr. Miller, or did any of your investigative team brief Mr. Miller in May of 2012?
It was on May 30th, Senator, 2012, where at a monthly briefing, which we regularly hold with both the Commissioner and his chief deputies, that we first raised this as an issue. Obviously, it was at the outset of the investigation.
Now, Mr. Miller says he's not aware of the practice that was going on in the EO. Did you brief him on the scope of the investigation?
I don't believe we went into the detail which may have laid out the scope, Senator, but we certainly alerted them to the fact that we were conducting this audit. I want to make sure I'm clear. I may have misused the word investigation. It was an audit that we were engaging in.
Now, Neil Woolen, as my colleague just pointed out, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, was briefed in June of 2012. I've just heard two people at the table say they didn't brief him. Mr. George, did you brief, or did part of your investigative team brief Neil Woolen, the Deputy Secretary of Treasury?
Senator, I personally, again, brought to Deputy Secretary Woolen's attention the fact that we were engaging in this audit. And
did that briefing cover the details of the scope of your investigation?
It did not, sir. It was other than to describe the nature of the audit, and that was the extent of it, because there were other matters that we were discussing.
Now, Mr. George, your investigation states that the council was briefed in August of 2011 of the practice at the EO. Was that the IRS council, or was it the Treasury General Counsel?
Actually, sir, it was in June 4th of 2012. Again, in terms of a regular setting that I have with meeting, I should say, that I have the General Counsel of the Department of the Treasury.
Now, I know you're talking about your briefing.
Yes.
I'm talking about a reference in your report that the council was briefed by somebody. I take for granted it was somebody within the EO. This was an exchange on the practice that was going on, that the council at the IRS was knowledgeable in 2011. Am I correct?
Sir, it was just pointed out to me that attorneys within the Office of Chief Counsel within the IRS were briefed on.
So the Chief Counsel of the IRS understood what the practice was that was going on within the EO of these applications, correct?
I was not at that set briefing, sir, but I don't know the extent to which they received information.
Well, here again, this was before your investigation started, but your investigation concluded that the General Counsel of the IRS knew of the practices. They had been discussed within the attorneys of the Internal Revenue Service.
It's the Office of Chief Counsel, and that they were provided a brief.
So is it normal for the Chief Counsel's office of an agency not to have any conversations with the Commissioner or the Deputy?
I have no idea of the practices.
Now, let me just turn to both of you. Mr. Miller, you said, are you testifying that the IRS counsel never talked to you about this?
No, sir. I haven't been asked that question, and I don't. If we could step back for a moment, sir. And I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that the timeline that you're referring to when it talks about Chief Counsel, it's talking about the Office of Chief Counsel, not necessarily the Chief Counsel, and that could have been anyone in that chain.
So you've got attorneys that are involved in a discussion about the practice that the EO is conducting on how they process applications, C4 applications. That would not have been something that was raised to the level of Commissioner?
Well, let me start by saying I didn't know that until I read the report. So, and I don't know anything about that meeting, sir. That's something that you guys should take a look at.
Mr. Schulman, are you testifying today that the council never discussed this matter with you?
I mean, if you're asking the question, did anyone from the Chief Counsel's office come and tell me about meetings they were having with the exempt organization function, I have no memory of anyone doing that.
Mr. Chairman, let me suggest that we need to get the Chief Counsel, William Wilkins, in to testify, see if the counsel's office signed off on this practice. I think that's absolutely crucial. Now, Mr. Miller, let me just ask you, has this practice stopped?
What practice, sir?
The practice of how they process consideration of these applications? Keywords, conservative, Tea Party, Patriot.
I believe that did happen. The names stopped when when Lois Lerner first learned of it. The second listing, by the way, if you take a look at that in the Treasury Inspector General's report, is still problematic because it talks about policy positions, but it actually is not particularly partisan in how it talks about policy positions.
So it was partisan. It was partisan before, though.
Yes, it absolutely was.
Let me just point out for the record that the target for approval within the IRS of these applications is 120 days. There are currently some applications that are over 1,200 days without action. So let me ask you, has this practice stopped? And if it has, what's the date that it stopped? If it stopped, it seems like these applications would have been processed by now.
So let's break this up a little bit, Senator, and let me see if I can answer your question. The process I'm talking about was the selection process. That's been modified. We've also worked on getting people the technical knowledge they need to work these cases. Some of these cases are difficult cases. They should not have taken as long as they have, but they still need some development, and those cases are being worked.
Is there any case, any application that you don't think could be processed in 1,200 days?
I would hope that they could, but there are cases that go into appeals. There are cases that go to court. There are all sorts of cases. These are difficult cases. There's no doubt that some part of that 1,200 was when they were languishing before May of 2012. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.